Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, good evening, good day, everyone, wherever you're hearing us from. Again, welcome to African News Review. I'm your host, as usual, Adesoji Iginla, in the crime scene, the imperial crime scene itself, the United Kingdom. And with me is none other than my host and none other than my guests. He is none other than Comrade Milton Allimadi. He is a broadcaster, journalist, author of the book Manufacturing Hate. In fact, his book here, which I keep handy at all times, inspired this conversation. And yes, we begin. How are you, Comrade Milton?
Very good. How was your week?
My week was pleasant as usual. You know, the news keeps rolling in and we keep on top of it.
Yes,
as regards Africa, Africa was actually largely in the news this week. For some reason, maybe they're trying to bury a story or something. So we go to the first story for today, which is from the EU itself. And it's reprimanding Morocco for some reason. And it comes from the Associated Press. Headlined, EU top court rules that agreement with Morocco failed to include Western Sahara consent. AP reporting from Brussels, the European Union top court ruled definitely on Friday that fisheries and agricultural agreements reached between the EU and Morocco 5 years ago failed to include consultations with the people of Western Sahara. For those who don't know, Western Sahara sits on the Atlantic coast and has a desert rich in phosphates. Morocco annexed the former Spanish colony in 1975, December 1975 actually, sparking a conflict with the pro-independence Polisario front. The United Nations considered the territory a non-self-governing one. The status of the Western Sahara is among the most sensitive topics in North African Kingdom. Morocco considers the vast territory at its southern provinces and fiercely defends against anything it considers to be a threat to its territorial integrity. I'll put that in inverted commas. In his ruling, the EU Court of Justice said for the 2019 EU-Morocco farm and fishery agreements to enter force, they must receive the consent of the people of Western Sahara. However, such consent has not been given in this instance. It is said the deals were concluded in breach of the principles of self-determination and relative effect of treaties. The Luxembourg-based court dismissed in their entirety legal appeals by the EU executive branch and the council representing the 27 member countries. Comment.
Yes. Okay, so what I like about the ruling
is
it mentioned the word self-determination.
Yep.
You see?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much the actual ruling itself, because I think the agreement for the fishing deal has expired anyway. But obviously, the agreement still is potentially very powerful.
Okay.
Because now you can go back and using that whole concept of self-determination, it means the agreement itself should have been, of course, null and void, right?
Okay.
And now it means that the resources that benefited the European countries that participated in the fishing, that's theft. That's plundered resources.
Piracy.
So it should be returned. to the people of the Sahrawari, as they call themselves, Democratic Republic. So if they're going to say that, well, there's no, as the UN said, is a non-self-governing territory.
Mm-hmm.
If they say there's no government, it doesn't mean that you cannot have a just adjudication of compensation owed for the value of the fish extracted, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Because, fishing brings in revenues in billions of dollars, right?
Yeah, correct.
I know that because off the Somali coast alone, I read some article that the fisheries that they're stealing from the coast of Somalia because of the weak government there is, remember when they were demonizing the Somalis as pirates? When in fact the pirates were those big ships coming from all those countries to steal their fish. And I think in one article it mentioned that the value was more than $1 billion.
Wow.
So if we are to use that same estimate, and if it's illegal fishing, it was illegal, but they thought they were doing it legally, they would not be doing it in a secretive way. So it's possible that they extracted more than $1 billion.
Yeah.
Even exceeding the one in the Somali coast. So that money, if you're to go 50-50, $500 million belongs to the Sahrawi people. So
you're being
the
fair.
lawyer who represented them
Mm-hmm.
should now say, thank you for this ruling. So now, using the language of this ruling, it means the court most likely will lean toward your favor because now you're using the court's own words,
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about people who are denied self-determination, well, what better way to let them express self-determination by giving them money that is owed to them? So that's what I like the most about this story. Obviously, I wish that the article had mentioned this or asked the lawyer, so now, in light of this ruling, in light of the fact that all these valuable resources were extracted, what are your thoughts on? Sometimes as a reporter, you have to think also in order to advance a story. So that's a question I would have asked him, and that's a question that I hope the reporter who wrote the story will still go back and ask the representatives of the Sahrawi people.
And also would like to add the reason why most of the Sahrawis are probably based in Algeria is because largely they've been made refugees.
Correct.
And the country has been divided vertically.
It's ironic that the Moroccans have done to the Sahrawi the exact same thing that the Israelis have done to the Palestinians.
Thank you very much.
And Morocco is talking about sovereignty. They don't want interference and all that. And ironic, they're repeating the same language that the French used to say when Morocco was a French colony.
Correct. So
it's amazing, man.
Shall we say they're suffering from nostalgia?
Or amnesia.
Exactly. And the fact that you have a 2,700 kilometer war running the length of the country to split something that is literally not yours into two is amazing.
If colonialism is bad for Moroccans as victims of the past colonialism, then colonialism is also bad for the people of the Sahrawi Democratic Republic. Free the Sahrawi people. Free Western Sahara.
And for those who might want to read further, there is a book titled The Fate of Africa by Jeremy Hardin. It's a 4-part book with, I think it's part 2 that is based on the Western Sahara. It goes into breadth the origin of the problem from pre-colonial days up till the promised 1990, which again, we're talking 33 years since, has been frustrated by the Moroccans. And yes, any final thoughts?
No, I think that's the essential thing. Of course, I'm a big supporter of the Sahrawi. I went there, when was it? 2009, 10 maybe, during President Obama's first term.
Okay.
or was it toward the end of his first term? So it might have been a little later because he won in 2008. He was sworn in 2009. So maybe around 2012.
Okay.
I went there. I went to, the Algerian side, of course, where I wouldn't even call them refugees, really. They're displaced people, but they're functioning. They're not living like, the image you get when people talk about refugees. They have a functioning, self-governing administration, which just happens not to be where they're supposed to be.
Yeah,
they have a trained, armed force. They keep their own security. So literally, Algeria is allowing them to function and practice government so that by the time they're able to go back to their occupied homes, they can continue running what they're already running on the Algerian side right now. They have schools, they have teachers, they have I wouldn't really say, you could say a legislator, right? They have a cabinet of ministers. What was very admirable was that they were getting a lot of assistance from Cuba. So Cuba doctors were there helping run the hospitals and also helping to train the Sahrawi, helping them with the schools. They also give them a lot of scholarships. So I really liked what I saw. I was very impressed. And I hope they get to run their own country one day.
Okay. As they say, a luta continua, victoria seta. And yes, on to, speaking of psychological victories, we go on to the passing of the first African or first Black UNESCO chief, which is a story we go to in the New York Times, the Grey Lady as she's called. And it's titled Amadou Maktar M'bow, 103, dies. His tenure leading UNESCO was stormy. He was the first Black African to head a major international organization, but complaints about his tenure led the US and Britain to pull out of it. Let's dig deeper.
All right. First of all, I can't even wait to go deep. It's a slur, really, on his legacy.
Yeah.
It's a slur because all you have to need to know is that when Britain and the U.S. Pulled out, respectively, the British leader was Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher.
Correct.
In the United States, you had Ronald Reagan. The two most reactionary rulers in the Western world. So that alone should tell you so for the writer not to acknowledge that and to make it seem as if it was a legitimate pullout, and presided over by these two right-wing extremist leaders is really unfair to the legacy of Amadou M'bow. And that's why I wanted to get that off the bat, so that even when you read, our audience knows the context.
Yeah.
Because if you just read the headline alone, you would get the wrong impression that it was a legitimate pullout. But all you need to know is nope. At that time, the leaders were respectively of the UK and the US, Thatcher and Reagan. End of story, right there, you see? And the writer knows that. He cannot be that dense, So you can't criticize Reagan and Thatcher on their right-wingism when it impacts other arenas and other people, and treat them as if they were competent, legitimate people. Right?
Correct.
When you know this is a major organization being led by, number one, an African, number two, a Black person, and you know that disposition already toward Africans and toward Black people. So by you not factoring that in, come on, Adam Nossiter, that's outrageous.
Okay. We continue.
And in fact, I'm going to write an editorial later this week rebutting this obituary.
Okay.
Completely unfair.
Okay, we continue. So Amadou Maktar M'bow, a Senegalese civil servant and politician who became the first Black African to head a major international organization when he was elected Director General of UNESCO, but whose contested tenure there led the United States and Britain to pull out. Died on Tuesday in Dakar, Senegal. He was 103. His death as a hospital was announced on the website of UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which was established to promote international cooperation in those domains. Mr. M'bow, a rare survivor among the continent's first generation of independence leader, had served as Senegal's Education and Culture Minister when he rose to the top post at UNESCO in 1974. Over the next 13 years, he turned the agency into a spearhead for grievances in the developing world and the Soviet bloc, mainly over Western cultural dominance, while entrenching himself behind a phalanx of hard-picked bureaucrats at UNESCO's headquarters in Paris. His resistance to Western influences, as well as accusation of misspending and nepotism, contributed to decisions by President Ronald Reagan and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher to pull their countries out of UNESCO in disgust. The US in 1984 and Britain in 1985. Britain rejoined in 1997 the United States in 2003. The withdrawal by the United States was disastrous for UNESCO as America's contributions had provided a quarter of its budget. For years afterwards, the agency was seen by the critics as a poster child for US bloat and politicization. Your take, please.
All right. So as I previously indicated, all of this is a complete, a respinning of history, right?
Mm-hmm.
It implies that had this particular individual, Mr. M'bow, not been the one heading UNESCO, the US and Britain would have embraced what UNESCO is trying to do. Right?
True. Yeah.
That's completely false, and the author knows that too.
Yeah.
So he's scapegoating M'bow rather than saying these are the kind of issues that a right-wing leader like Reagan and a right-wing leader like Thatcher would not support. Sharing scientific information, right? Redressing the issue of cultural imperialism, right?
Yep.
Are these the things that a Reagan or Thatcher would support?
Mm.
So instead of framing it and saying perhaps what he was trying to do came at a time when it was completely inauspicious to try to do something like that. Because the leading donor country, the United States, was headed by a guy like Ronald Reagan, who was cutting social spending in the United States,
Yeah.
impacting African Americans, African descendants in the United States.
Yep.
So if he was treating African descendants in the U.S., you think he would be inclined to support an organization headed by an African that is trying to redress these historical legacies? The answer is no. So did this not cross the author's mind, the author of this article, Nosita? Or does he just not care? And it seems to me he just does not care. He cannot be that ignorant. Normally, the people who write for the New York Times are educated. They like recruiting from Ivy League schools, right? Mm-hmm. These are not former reporters from the New York Post who are then recruited to come write for the New York Times. It doesn't really work that way. So that's why this writing over somebody who really achieved so much, and I'm not saying he's perfect, and I'll go into that in a minute, but I'm saying this obituary is completely unfair to the legacy of this individual. And I'll get to some of the contributions that he made that should have been acknowledged first and then go into any shortcomings that he may have had.
Now, so what would you say your gripe with his administration was?
Okay, I think it was not so much a gripe, but I think what he was addressing was legitimate. The issue of not only cultural imperialism. historical imperialism, meaning the powerful Western countries, the industrialized countries, get to write their history and our history, right?
Fantastic.
So
yes,
if you're reading about the history of West Africa, the former French colonies, the books will be written by European French, correct? If you're reading the history of East African countries, or if Ghana, Nigeria, the books will be written by British European authors. Now, is that really fair? Do you find any Ugandans writing the history of Britain, and those are the books that are used in British schools? Do you find any Ugandan writing a history of the United States, and those are the books using to instruct Americans in school, from grade school to secondary school to college? And of course, the answer is completely,
no,
absolutely no. And these are the things that he said needed to be addressed. Now, in terms of media dominance, which of course is still with us today, but was much more intense even in those days. He said we should have, I forget the term he used, a new global information order or something like that.
Yes.
And what he was trying to say was that the dominance of the narrative established by, at that time, I don't think CNN existed, but media outlets such as that. But the BBC was already there. The
Voice of America.
Voice of America, the New York Times,
Radio
the Washington Post, was already there, right? He's saying often they have an agenda, and that becomes the only story. So in order to counter it, we need to find a way to regulate these stories. So I think that is the part where that was the best idea or proposal that he could offer at that time. I don't think that's the right way to do it. Because once you start regulating, that is very similar to what African autocratic governments do to domestic media within African countries. At that time, there was not even much when he started out. I think he became Secretary General in 1975, something like that, or 74 rather.
74.
At that time, there was, if any, probably virtually almost non-existent in terms of free press, independent press in African countries. They were mostly just the government newspaper, the government-controlled radio, the government-controlled TV. So now, in order to counter this imperialism, information imperialism of the West, we're saying we should induce this type of regulations and restrictions
Top-down
that
control
would only legitimate the restrictions that are being applied against domestic media by African autocracy. So that was the problem. But obviously, that has now been partially addressed because now you have plenty of privately owned media in many African countries, number one. Number two, the internet and social media have somewhat democratized the ability to collect, gather, and disseminate information. So if he was operating today, I don't think that's how he would have proposed that we counter the pervasive imperialism of Western narratives that predominate globally and particularly in Africa. So that's what it was trying to do. So I understand what it was trying to do. So that would be my reservations. But in terms of the topic, okay, so for example, he was actually trying to push back against what is now called fake news. So he was way ahead of his time. He was talking about fake news. He did not use that term, you see? But now fake news we find pervasive even within these Western countries, right?
True.
In Britain, in the United States, the two countries that led the campaign to malign him withdrew so that the organization suffered financial distress. You know, what it was trying to do was not as drastic enough for you to take that kind of action.
Yeah.
Is the main point I was trying to make. And many of the issues that he addressed, we are now seeing materializing in front of our own eyes. You know?
My salute to him would be taken from one of his pet projects, which is the publication of the General History of Africa.
Absolutely. And
Volumes
if
1
Nosita
to 8.
knew anything at all, that's what he should have started with. But obviously, he's not familiar with the impact of the series, the UNESCO series on Africa, which included very many prominent African scientists, African historians, Professor Ogoth, Professor Cheka
Allimadi,
Anto Job, Mazri, and all these.
Adubuahen.
Absolutely. So if he knew the impact of that, he would have elevated that in the lead. So he's still writing to, I don't know how old he is, and that is also might be relevant. He's writing to an era of people whose mindset are still in the 1980s and 1990s. For him to not acknowledge that the issues that M'bow was trying to address is not mind-boggling, because obviously Nosita must be educated, so it's disturbing rather than mind-boggling. It's disturbing. He writes the editorial as if he's not anticipating that it would be read by people like myself and like people like you. And we would be able to deconstruct and critique it. So who is he writing for then? Is he writing for a bunch of Eurocentric people who viewed M'bow, who view M'bow today as the ones who were there in the 1970s? That's the only way in which this could make sense. There's a part where, and I forget the entire sentence, where he used the terms something like perceived Western monopoly on reporting and dissemination of news.
There's no
Is that something that is perceived? Really?
That's the
Is that something that's perceived? If he was sitting in front of me, I would ask him honestly a question. Is that really something that you believe in your heart is perceived, or is that a reality and a fact? And if he's honest, he would have to say, yes, it's a reality. So why would he write perceived? That to me suggests malicious intent. And that's why I say it's disturbing, not mind-boggling.
I mean,
that he's writing things that he himself knows not to be true. And he's actually confirming what M'bow was trying to fight against.
Which is why I wanted to read a sentence or two from M'bow. He wrote the introduction in most of this series. But there's a part here in the final series, final volume, volume 8, Africa since 1935, where he says, another phenomenon that did great disservice to the objective study of the African past was the appearance, with slave trade and colonization, of racial stereotypes that bred contempt and lack of understanding and became so deep-rooted that they distorted even the basic concepts of historiography.
Yeah.
And finally, he said, Africans, from the time when the notion of white and black were used as generic labels by the colonialists, who were regarded as superior, the colonized Africans had to struggle against both economic, psychological enslavement. Africans were only identified by the color of their skin because they had become a kind of merchandise earmarked for hard labor, and eventually in the minds of those dominated them, they came to symbolize an imagery and inferior Negro race. This pattern of spurious identification relegated the history of African people in many minds to the rank of ethnocentry, in which appreciation of the historical and cultural facts are bound to be warped.
Oh, that is some deep stuff. I'm glad you read that. When I rewrite, when I do the second version of my book, Manufacturing Hate, I'm definitely going to quote that and accept that and give him the tribute that he deserves. So forget about Nosita. Africans know, and not only Africans. Okay. The part I like was that the current Secretary General, I think is a European, of the UNESCO paid tribute to M'bow in a statement. So Nosita quotes that tribute and says the Secretary General neglected to point out his shortcomings.
Which
talk about piling it on. Your whole article is cutting him down, and you want everybody else to follow your lead and cut him down. That's precisely what he was fighting against, that you guys get to set the narrative, and you want everybody to follow the same narrative that you set. So while the current Secretary General may acknowledge that Mr. M'bow may have had some shortcomings, like most human beings do, the achievements far outweigh the shortcomings. And if you're using your anchor, your strongest argument is that you have proven that he had shortcomings because the US and Britain quit, you're defeating your own argument, because the US and Britain at that time were led respectively, as I said from the beginning, right-wing extremists, particularly when it comes to dealing with African issues. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. These are people who did not even want to fight apartheid in South Africa. They were talking about constructive engagement with the apartheid regime. And you're using them as the people to rebut M'bow. Shame on you. That's my final word to Nosita. Shame on you, truly.
For those watching, if you like what you're listening to, please do comment and leave a comment in the comment section. It's bound to keep the conversation going and also provide areas of interest where we can further, the scope of this program. And we do appreciate you. Again, if this is your first time here, do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And for our next story, we go to Paris, the city of love. And it comes from Mr. Macron. And the story is from the Radio France International. And it's headlined, Macron hosts Francophonie Summit to boost influence in French-speaking world. The lead is the annual Francophonie Summit kicks off on Friday, an opportunity for host country France to try and bolster its influence in a conflict-ridden world, particularly in Africa. Chad President Mahamat Idriss Déby, an ally of France, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau are amongst the prominent guests. Dozens of leaders of French-speaking countries gather on Friday and Saturday for the Francophonie Summit, the first time the event had been held in Paris for 33 years. France's way in Africa had been badly eroded by successive coups in Mali in 2021, Burkina Faso 2022, and Niger in 2023, which saw Paris-friendly governments replaced by hunters who turned to Russia. Meanwhile, the crisis in France's former protectorate Lebanon, which is targeted by daily Israeli bombardment and now a ground incursion as Israel attacks Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah, has showed up France's diminished influence in the Middle East. There's one part, So a space for mediation and dialogue. While key African leaders such as Democratic Republic of Congo President Felix Tshisekedi will be present, those of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have not been invited. A prominent guest is Chad President Mahamat Idriss Déby, an ally of France and regular visitor to Paris, whose Sahel nations still host French troops even after their departure from Mali, Burkina, and Niger. Guinea had been invited despite its junta under General Mamadi Doumbouya taking power in a 2021 coup. A delegation from Lebanon is coming, but not its prime minister. What do you read from that story? Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
Okay, so I'm trying to adjust my screen a little bit.
Okay.
I want to get closer to the power outlet. I don't want us to run out of power in the middle of discussion.
Okay.
But so far, what I'm reading, and of course, my impression is that obviously this is trying to capture an era that has already passed. You're right.
Yeah.
These are the kind of meetings that you could have in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, maybe even 1990s, but not today. So in that respect, it's very similar actually to the obituary that we just read by Nosita of M'bow. You're going to invite these people to Paris.
Okay.
They're going to be at the LSA
Palace
building. There'll be some international media there.
Yeah.
They'll be shown on TV, Then what are you going
Paris.
What are they going to accomplish? What are they going to do after they go back to their respective countries as a result of meeting with you? What is the purpose of the meeting? So you're showing the leaders who are not invited, right? So I take it the leaders who are not invited are the ones in Burkina Faso, correct?
Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger.
Was the leader of Gabon invited?
I think by virtue of them not mentioning him, he was invited.
Okay. So he came there in a coup d'etat as well, correct? Was the leader of Chad invited?
Yes.
Yes. And he came there in a coup d'etat as well.
Yeah.
And yet the article implies that the ones who are not invited were because they deposed governments, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So what about these two then? So obviously, it's not about that the leaders who are not invited seize power militarily. It's the fact that they seize power and they're saying they don't like what France is doing in their countries. That's why they were not invited. They don't like the fact that you are stationed troops in our country. You say you are helping us to fight the so-called jihadists, and yet we are not seeing any progress. In fact, they're gaining ground. So what is the use of you having soldiers in our country, unless it's for a different purpose? They're saying, we don't like the fact that you are not paying us for our rich mineral resources. And if you're paying us, you're basically paying us pennies. You extracted, we don't even know the quantities that you're taking, right? So we can't verify the quantities, and we can't impact what you're paying us, which is, of course, peanuts. So these are issues we want to redress. That's what they don't like. So they're going about it the wrong way, inviting the ones who are willing to continue being neocolonial puppets. They're exacerbating the situation, and they are making it inevitable that the ones who are being invited eventually are going to be deposed as well.
Yep.
Because the people who are deposing, even if they had personal agendas, have now discovered that there's a grassroots agenda, which is much stronger than their personal agenda. So if the one in Gabon has a personal agenda for seizing power, and of course we know it does.
Yeah.
The one in Chad, the same thing. The one in Guinea, I don't know if he was invited or not, but that's besides the point. If he has a personal agenda, very soon the grassroots agenda is going to become overwhelming. And they'll end up they'll be deposed by people who share more of the kind of philosophy of the leadership in Burkina Faso, Mali, in Niger. So, but what happens is that for France, for United States, and for that matter, even for China, to do the right thing, it will involve diminishing a standard of living to some extent, at least in the short run, in their countries. And that's something that they're not willing to do. So instead, they continue exploiting Africa's resources. How can you take the things you need to produce your manufactures from Africa, and yet you don't want to pay them what you would call even a livable wage, right, for their labor and their resources, and that you produce items that you sell to them at grossly inflated price relative to what you are extracting from their countries. That's really, you think we can build a better world like that? And then you're surprised when they're going across the Mediterranean in these rickety boats and drowning, when they're coming across the border here in the United States, having taken that long journey in the thick forest in South America. You're really surprised by that. It just shows that in terms of leadership in the industrialized world, there's not a will to really take the action that's needed. And I suppose there's not a will because the people, the citizens are not ready. Because if a Macron says we need to invest in such a way or buy the raw material in such a way that enables African countries to retain a level of profit that they can use that capital to start industrializing, who would vote for him in France? You see? Who would vote for him? So now they're the victims of their own demonization of Africa because their citizens are not conscious enough to support a politician who would preach something like that. So the Africans who are in Britain, Africans who are in France, in Spain, they need to start building that level of consciousness so then their children or their children's children may live amongst Europeans who know that you can't have one world for Europeans and another world for Africans. You see? But now they believe in that, not even maliciously racist. They're the malicious racists who are out there, of course. But those are not the real dangerous ones. The dangerous ones are the ones who think that they are progressive, they love all human beings, regardless of complexion or nationality or religion. But deep down, they're actually not, you see, because they're not enlightened enough to know that we cannot build a better world if we are the only ones who enjoy a high standard of living. And they question, why is it that Africans don't enjoy a high standard of living in Africa? They don't, because they think Africa's always been like that.
Like that, yeah.
You see? And that's the problem.
One further question there is, with regards to those leaders who did not attend, I mean, you spoke to it, the fact that sooner or later, the population in the unaffected countries, in inverted commas at the moment, are probably looking at the population where they've made some reactionary changes. That's what some people might deem it as. In the course of time, how long do you think it's sustainable for the likes of Cameroon, the likes of even Congo with Tshisekedi, carry this sort of leaders who are carrying water for France? Because Paul Biya has been there since 1982. 1982.
Oh, yeah.
And at this point in time, he largely resides in Switzerland.
Yeah, I mean, so right now they have a war in Cameroon.
In the south.
Between, I don't know how much of it is really war, right? Because
it's a control of resources.
Right, the French-speaking zone, of course, they control the armed forces. They have sophisticated weapons. They're French advisors. So, I suppose part of it is resistance from people in the English-speaking part of the country. by the way, where the resources, the oil is concentrated. So I hesitate to use the term. Maybe conflict is a better term, because war almost implies
there are two equal sides.
Yeah, exactly. When in fact one side might be, being brutalized and fighting resistance, right? And I fear this is going to get much worse when this guy dies, Paul Biya. How old is he? Is he almost 90 or something?
It's 90. I think it's 91, or if I'm not mistaken,
Think about
91
that.
or so.
He's not in good health. There's no transition mechanism. So he dies, probably the commander of the armed forces or the chief of staff is going to, he's going to emerge as a leader, right?
Yep.
And if he's a military guy, he's going to continue pressing the military solution. But this is not an issue for France because they support the military ruler in Chad, who is the son of Idris Deby, who died. His son, Mahamat Deby, who's also a military guy, has succeeded him. And they're working with him. So they're hoping that they'll probably work. Probably the military guy is already running Cameroon anyway.
Yeah.
So they'll just continue working with him. And because to them, so long as the status quo is maintained, that is all they care about. So long as we get resources on favorable terms to France.
That is all that matters.
It goes back to the crude, base human tendency. If I can cheat and exploit somebody, why should I stop cheating and exploiting somebody? Unless there's something to compel me to stop cheating and exploiting somebody. You see? And that's what it boils down to. And the interventions in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, as I said, whether initially it was self-serving, it is no longer self-serving. The grassroots are demanding that these issues be addressed. Addressing them is not in the interest of a former imperial power like France, who still hopes somehow to maintain relevance
status as business as usual
power.
Yeah,
a false imperial power.
But you will still scream "Viva la France" or whatever.
The only thing I like
Go on.
is that I think it was yesterday or the day before that Macron said they should stop providing weapons to Israel. And of course, Netanyahu just went ballistic yesterday, lambasting him, we'll win, final victory with or without France, and all that nonsense, So that's the most relevant thing that Macron has done in the last couple of days.
Okay, we wait and see. And coming back to, for our last two stories, we come back to the United Kingdom.
Okay, so I may have to, block my image for a minute while I try to secure an energy source so that we don't run out of power.
Okay,
but I can continue listening to you.
I would read out the excerpt. And so the next story comes from the British, from the Guardian, the UK Guardian, and it's titled "The British Army to Investigate Conduct of Troops in Kenya Amid Rape and Murder Claims. Defense Secretary to meet family of woman allegedly killed by soldier," as ITV airs. ITV is a local news station, TV station in the United Kingdom, airs documentary alleging fresh abuses. The story is written by Hannah Ottman. The army is to launch an inquiry into the behavior of British troops posted to a military base in Kenya after multiple allegations of serious abuses committed by soldiers, including trigger warning, rape, and murder. The inquiry is to examine the conduct of military personnel posted to the British Army training units Batuk for short. It is where the soldier is alleged to have murdered a Kenyan woman, Agnes Wajiru, was posted at the time of her death in 2012. An ITV exposure documentary airing on Sunday returned to Nanyuki, close to the base, and found that the allegations of abuse were still emerging. British soldiers are alleged to have regularly paid for sex with local women and to have raped multiple women as well as girls as young as 13. An MOD, Ministry of Defense spokesperson, said the Defense Secretary has discussed with the Chief of General Staff these alarming allegations of unacceptable behavior by service personnel deployed to Kenya. I continue here. The previous government prohibited British troops from paying for sex overseas and warned they could face dismissals if they contravened the ban. However, the allegations from ITV suggest it is consistently flouted. The ban followed a Sunday Times investigation into the death of Wajiru, a young woman who lived in poverty, and sometimes sold sex to help provide for her daughter. She lived in Nanyuki, where soldiers would socialize in their downtime, drinking heavily and paying local women for as little as £1 for sex. Wajiru, who was stabbed multiple times, was last seen drinking with British troops. A Kenyan inquest found that one or more British soldiers were responsible for her murder. Your take, sir. There's a very incendiary part there, which...
All right,
or
so
a socially... Go on.
This, first of all, why are you having British soldiers train your military? Given the history that you had, that you fought against the British Army to win your independence, right? Would you see the United States inviting British soldiers to train the U.S. military, having defeated, Britain in the War of Independence? The answer is absolutely zero, no. The second thing, which is so disturbing, is that this murder happened years ago. Is it almost like 12 years ago?
12 years ago, yeah.
That it is now becoming on the forefront today, 12 years later, right?
Yeah.
It shows you that, the life of an African, number one, African woman, number two, African woman, sex worker, number three, has absolutely no value. So she's valuable enough to have sex with, but not to preserve her life, just think about it carefully. Her life is not worth living, but so long as she's still alive, I'm going to have sex with her. But she's so dispensable, get rid of her, because there'll be another one anyway. And I'm paying her like what, £1 or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. That story even cheapened her life.
How much is a pint of beer in a pub in London?
That would be about £2.50 pre-COVID.
Okay. So it'll
be higher than that now.
You can get almost 3 victims for the price of a big glass of beer. And that's the mindset that is operating on the perpetrators of this crime, right? It's so sad. So right now you have Ukraine at war with Russia. Let's say the British send a training detachment to train soldiers in the Ukrainian military. And because of social conditions, social status, there's sex workers all over the world, right?
True.
Including there in Britain, here in the United States. Do you really think members of the British training team in Ukraine wouldn't have sex with a Ukrainian sex worker and then just kill them and then nothing happens? Just think about that. That is the disturbing dichotomy here, the contradiction. It tells you how much they devalue the humanity. And here's the other disturbing thing. I've done it for such a long time that even some of our African sisters and brothers devalue African lives and humanity as well.
So they're being culturalized.
Because it's not such a big thing as it should be in Kenya itself. Because we are being told that even though this happened 12 years ago, Kenya is still allowing Britain to continue training its army. And now we are learning the sex abuse is still continuing. You can't, Hollywood cannot even script this up, my friend. We have serious issues. It's very serious. It goes beyond just you and I critiquing the news, sadly. Because as we critique it, we reveal the level of some sort of almost like a psychosis that our people need to overcome. You see? The historical demonization has had tremendous impact on our people, devastating at the highest level. Why would the Kenyan leadership still allow Britain to be training its army? Think about it. Because to them, this Kenyan woman, number one, is just a black woman, is just an African, just a sex worker. Are we going to jeopardize our relationship with Britain over a person with these attributes? And the answer, they've already answered it. The answer is no, of course not. So unless we as Africans show that we value the lives of fellow Africans, why should non-Africans value the lives of Africans? That's a question that the Kenyans leadership needs to address. I'm not saying all Kenyans are like that, of course. I'm addressing the people in power who are concerned with these issues, particularly in a case like this.
I'm stumped for words. I don't even know what to say.
It's crazy, man.
I'm stumped. And
we just hope that the family does get justice. We hope that there's serious reparations. Normally they only take things seriously when it impacts their wallets. So now that they're acknowledging the crime, I hope, the family gets compensation. They will not bring the life of their beloved one back, but at least if she had children in fact, I think she does. I think that's why she was engaged in sex work at the same place, in the first place. So I hope that they get the just compensation to take care of her family.
And we go by the words of Kwame Nkrumah, who once said, the moment you have a foreign military base on your soil, you're not independent.
Absolutely.
That's one of the highest form of neocolonialism, if not. You're not independent. You can't claim independence.
No.
Thank you for that. And for the final story, we go to the story of the week. It comes from the Financial Times, and it reads, "Deal comes after 50 years of wrangling over the remote but strategically important archipelago."
Okay, but look at the headline, first of all.
Good.
Of the Financial Times.
Yeah.
It's amazing. How can you give something that doesn't belong to you? Just, the audacity, Not even returns.
No, because...
But gives.
To say you return means you've taken something arbitrarily.
Exactly.
You cannot come on. You cannot admit to
so
you
they're wiping away the theft, right?
Exactly. Okay, I continue. So it says, the deal comes after 50 years of wrangling over the remote but strategically important archipelago. And the story is written by Lucy Fisher and Joseph Cottrell in London. The UK has agreed to give up sovereignty of a group of islands in the Indian Ocean to Mauritius in return for securing the future of a UK-US military base situated in Diego Garcia. The deal over the British Indian Ocean territory, I highlighted that for a reason, is also known as Chagos Islands, will give the UK an initial 99-year lease over Diego Garcia in return for accepting Mauritian sovereignty. Diego Garcia will also be kept out of a deal for Mauritius to resettle the island, which was depopulated when the UK forcibly relocated islanders decades ago. The UK Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, said the agreement secured a vital military base for the future and guaranteed Britain's long-term relationships with Mauritius, a close Commonwealth partner. The deal came after 50 years of wrangling over the remote but strategically important archipelago, which lies approximately halfway between East Africa and Indonesia. The UK carved the island out as a separate territory before Mauritius won independence from Britain in 1968. As part of a package of financial support, the UK will make indexed annual payments to Mauritius over the Diego Garcia base, which the UK originally leased to the US in 1966 for 50 years, a deal that was extended until 2036. Let me say something first with regards to the UK carved out the island as a separate territory before Mauritius won independence from Britain in 1968. That is a tall lie. One of the conditions for granting Mauritius independence was you can have independence as long as you do not claim ownership of the Chagos Islands. That was one of the conditions. And I'll allow you to speak then. I will add to what I wanted to say. You go on.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're very careful by their choice of words because I don't think the deal has been finalized, right? And they don't want to open other legal avenues.
Yeah.
And that's why they're not acknowledging that it was stolen in the first place.
Yeah.
Although they are actually. How are you saying, here's independence, but part of your territory?
We'll have to go.
Absolutely. That in itself is a confirmation and affirmation of the theft. So they use terms such as in the headline, give, and then I think in the first or second paragraph, agreed, quote unquote, to give up, right? Yeah. And then another thing they use, accepting Mauritius sovereignty, right? Think about that.
So which means they didn't accept it in the first place.
Absolutely. And then, of course, I'm bothered by the terms 99-year lease. Things will change a lot. I don't think you need 99 years to be able to take a much more firm position against Britain. The world is going to change dramatically in the next 20 years. Britain will not be in a position to impose the kind of imperialism that it can still wield today. So why are you giving them a 99-year? At the most, maybe, I know they can't say it's zero because Mauritius does not have, what is helping Mauritius, the power it has is publicity.
Yeah, moral power.
And building allies. And that is the power they have. Right?
Yeah.
So maybe this is what they could get now. But I think in 30 years, they could get something much better. So I think it should not have been 99 years. It should have been 30 years. Many parts of the world that are not able to stand up to Britain today will be able to do so in 30 years. And for that matter, stand up against the United States as well, because the United States is involved. The United States has the base in Diego Garcia as a result of the deal that it did with Britain in 1966, as the article informs us. So that is my main area of concern. And also, and I bet you the answer is no. Now, Britain is going to be paying like a rent to the government of Mauritius. Correct? For Britain, by now acknowledging that it wrongfully seized since 68, Britain owes money since 68, part one. But Britain also owes another stream of money, which is the money it was getting from the U.S.
Yeah.
If you, Adesoji, come and you kick me out of my home, 10 years later, I'm able to fight you. Say, okay, I'm going to continue here in the home, but now let's sign a lease.
Yeah.
Going forward, I'll pay you. I'll say, okay, fine. But I want you to pay me for having kicked me out of my home for 10 years. And then I understand you've been renting it to your cousin. So I want the rents you are collecting from your cousin as well. I bet you that's not in the deal. And of course, it should be in the deal. But if they think that's the best they can get for now, who am I sitting from the comfort of being an observer to say this, But that is why it's even, go back to the first point of the 99-year lease. In 20 to 25 years, maybe you'll be in a stronger position. So listen, this is a good time to talk about back rent too.
Yep.
And
also I'd like to add that Diego Garcia, the Chagos Islands story is one of the use of imperialist power to the 9th degree. The kind of atrocities they committed against 2,000 families.
Right.
Gassing their dogs.
Think about that.
Ensuring that food supplies does not come to the island in order to get them off. People who went to Mauritius to seek medical help were not allowed to return.
Right. And that is the part that is not well fleshed out in this article. The article mentions that the displacement was considered a crime against humanity.
Yeah.
But then the article does not elaborate what you just said right now. And that should have been there as well. The people who are supporting this cause need to know that. And once again, I go back to what I said. The 99-year lease is too long.
And for those who want to know more with regards to Diego Garcia, I'm going to put a documentary on the screen. It's titled Stealing a Nation by John Pilger. It's a documentary released in 2004. I enjoy people to actually watch it. It's a tearjerker, so get your tissues ready, because you will see the callous nature with which people were speaking in there. John Pilger does a masterpiece. Again, the title of the documentary is Stealing a Nation by John Pilger. You could see it on YouTube. There's a couple of not versions anyway. People have ripped the documentary and put it on YouTube, so you could watch it on YouTube. By the time I watched it on TV, and I actually watched it in the course of the week while preparing for this program. And yes, so again, or if you do need a book, if you're a book person, you could read Evictions from the Chagos Islands. It's a series of essays written by people who are Chagosians and people who were well versed in the issue. And so it's a brilliant read. I can't lay my hands on my copy at the moment. Sorry?
I said more power to them.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, sometimes you don't have the power, but you find allies that are willing to go the extra mile. And
the most important thing is to keep fighting, because they surrendered a long time ago and said, this is a battle that we cannot win. It's not worth wasting our time. We would not be having this conversation today.
Yep.
You see? So if you have a legitimate just cause, no matter how daunting it may appear at some times, no matter how lonely it may appear, it goes back to a conversation we had some time back when we discussed the Cameroonian. How did we know that Paul Biya was living most of the time of the year
Switzerland
in a penthouse in a Swiss hotel? How did we know? It was because I read about it in the Wall Street Journal. And why did the Wall Street Journal write about it? One person was having a daily protest in front of the hotel where he lives every day. And then eventually a reporter approached him and said, "Why are you here protesting every day?" He said, "Because the guy who's supposed to be the president of my country, Cameroon, lives here." And the reporter said, "Wait, how can he govern the country and live here at the same time?" He said, "That's the point. He's not running the country. He's stealing money and he's living here. While back home he's leaving us with this conflict." It became a big story that focused on the issues of Cameroon. But it started with one person.
One man, one voice.
If you have a legitimate cause, if you have a one person fighting already, that is already one person too many. And then get others to join you, of course.
Yeah.
So I think that's the lesson of the people of Chagos as well.
Yeah. And kudos to them. And hopefully we see a positive end, because like one of the stories I read, I think it was in Al Jazeera, where they said some of the people that were evicted from there, the older generation, are now dying. In fact, some of their dying wish is to go back there and die there.
At home, right.
And die at home, So hopefully they get their wish. And yes, again, we've come to the end of another episode of African News Review. Our guests, Comrade Milton Allimadi, bringing his expertise and well-versed knowledge in the African affairs to play.
Thank you.
And appreciation. Last words?
Asante sana, aluta continua, and see you next week, everybody.
And from me, as we say in Yoruba, Odigba kono, which is see you later. Bye for now. That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.